my variations for piano titled Bulgaria 1300 were composed in 2017 and premiered on my birthday in a recital in our hall in Bloomington's Indiana University Jacob School of Music on February the 20th of 2017. The original theme, which I just played for you, which I treat in these 30 variations for piano, is in fact a quotation of a theme that I composed in 1981 for then the 1300th birthday anniversary of the foundation of the state of Bulgaria in 681 after Christ. And in 1981, this symphonic poem for orchestra and piano, in fact the format and genre of a piano concerto in 3 movements, opened with this piano introduction before the orchestra enters in, and it becomes a fully fledged concerto for piano and orchestra. And that theme, epic, very mythological, grand storytelling overture, narrative, majestic, is very much inspired by the Slavic roots of mine from my birth in Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria. While I left at age 7 to study in Paris with Nadia Boulanger, where my parents committed the sacrifice to leave their country, family, in order to allow me to be age 7 able to study with this great lady for almost 10 years in Paris. She chose me as her last disciple, but I had to be brought to her and therefore leave my native Bulgaria by the age of 7. So nostalgia, perhaps not. Pride, possibly too. Perhaps mix the two, and also as all exiled people, while I was in Paris, my father would talk to me about the history of my birth country. Granted, my mother was Greek, so I had, in fact, in terms of background, I have a half Bulgarian origin, but I don't quantify that. It was more about, and not even a sense of belonging, since I grew up in Paris. I went to school in Paris and I became an adult in Paris. I remained nevertheless born in a Slavic country, as they say, in the middle of the East, East Europe. And the desire in 2017 to write a theme and variations on that theme of my symphonic poem, Bulgaria 1300, came as a natural call of my musical background, probably intuitive and most likely subconscious, since I didn't grow up there, since I grew up in Paris. And now for the last 20 more years, I teach in Bloomington, Indiana. So it's more about the musical modes. I use the mode of D, re in Latin words. And I use the very characteristic, and you don't use it, I have to, it's a calling, the technique of the ostinato, which is either repeated, either single grand bass line holding a certain tone, and then other notes around. Harmonic progressions are played over this constant bass note. In the early childhood of mine, when I was 10, I composed a piano concerto, also indeed inspired by the Bulgarian folkloric music that I had been told about by my father in Paris. For instance, it has an ostinato also with repeated notes. This is the opening of the first theme of my concerto. In the concerto, the timpani play the ostinato constantly. In this opening of Bulgaria 1300, I use a continuous space note. And the theme comes down melodically harmonized, almost like a chorale, over the ostinato. The ostinato comes in many ways through the variations. For instance, the first variation. And the mode of D minor evolves between major, minor, harmonic, melodic, or altered. Most typical for this area of the world where Bulgaria is the minor second next to the tonic. Don't forget the ancient modes of Greece were always descending. And they often have a semitone to the tonic, which in the tonal system way later into the 17th, 18th, 19th century until the atonalism of the 20th broke it. The leading tone is semitone to the tonic because the harmonic scales are rising. So you have the semitone connecting to the tonic by a magnetic connection call. And here it's on the way down. Now I don't stick to that simple and single mode. I alter it through the piece. But and I will display the different variations to give them a little description. But I would like to make sure that first and foremost the Bulgarian inspiration here is not only because of the title. As a matter of fact, the title in 1981 was more of an opportunity to celebrate because of the round year of 1300. And so it's not a militant gesture or a patriotic gesture or some kind of ideological gesture to write formal music that would be descriptive of the Bulgarian character. I think in any case it is no more than Chopin, and I don't compare myself to geniuses like him, just the exiled factor in Paris writing mazurkas or Liszt Hungarian rhapsodies, no matter where in Europe he was. And he didn't even speak Hungarian because he never really grew up there and was part of Austria. And then Bulgaria was part of the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, for 5 centuries until the end of the 19th century. So a lot of the augmented seconds that comes in the harmonic minor scale, as we call it today, are also influences of Turkey, as it left influence on the Bulgarian language because of 5 centuries of continuous occupation. So I did speak Bulgarian, and I still do, mostly phonetically, because I grew up mostly not in Bulgaria. But the music is an international, they say universal language, but in this case the piece is in a way musically, ethnically connected, either through the modal fact or either through the ostinato fact or even through some rhythmic syncopation facts or uneven rhythms that are part of the Bulgarian folklore. But I do not quote specifically, in this case, any tune or a folk tune like Bartok did. He did actually a first musicological, ethnomusicological research by going through the Balkans, which is the big mountain there, and on the Romanian side, and going to the Hungarian side, and the Transylvanian, and so on, and Bulgarian too. In the early days of the 20th century, with a recording device, audio, as rudimentary as it must have been then and bulky to carry, but he went to capture the oral transmission of the traditional music of this area of the world from which he came also, a Romanian area of Hungary. All these enclaves of minorities are there in this very small space with many different ethnic groups, the Albanians, the Serbians, the Croatians, the Montenegrins, the Bulgarians, the Macedonians, and all those. The fact is that I do not quote specifically, but I write in the what I perceive to be the Bulgarian musical atmosphere. It's not a quotation folklorically, or as Bartok did when he took on dictation, and he wrote even Bulgarian dances, Bartok himself, out of these and other researches he did ethnomusicologically to capture the then only oral tradition transmitted through centuries in the villages of these areas. I didn't do that, and I don't have the pretension that my music is ethnomusicological. It's just inspired by my roots, of course filtered by my education, which was in France, not specifically French, but in France. And my teacher was, in any case, Mademoiselle Boulanger, officially and ethnically half Russian and half French. Nadia, her name meant in Russia, which is a nickname or a term of endearment name, is Nadezhda, which means hope. And Nadia is the short for that. So yes, I do have this since early childhood, with this example of my Concerto No. 1, premiered in 1973 when I was 11, composed when I was 10, conducted by Menuhin in Paris. And it had this timpani playing ostinato on D, the same D which I use for the theme and variations, based on this tone poem of mine for orchestra and piano called Bulgaria 1300. Now, the end of the theme ends on the tonic in the Picardy third. And then the following bars at the end of the theme are in fact a slow drop to the dominant A major in order to start the first of the 30 variations. On the tonic of D minor. So these are the 4 bars before the beginning of first variation, and in fact they are sort of the bridge transition between the end of the subject theme here. First variation. the ostinato in syncopation with semitones above and around and even more. And I keep in the center of the keyboard the soundscape with the theme in the melody on the top, while the harmonization mixes with the chromatic descent of its chaconne style lament descent of the tetrachord chromatic, blending with the ostinato in the center of the keyboard, which calls for the performer to play extremely voiced, layered, brought out and sculpted in 3D. If it's played all blunt, it becomes confusingly bunched, and I rather have it voiced, and the harmonizations in whole or half notes large but soft, and the syncopation also soft but recurrent. And I also use fragmentation of the theme that it can be heard in different voices. For instance, in the second half of the first variation, theme on the melody. It's not really a theme, but it's a melody that has a thematic meaning, while the theme is in the middle voice. Between the alto and the tenor. And I use, call or search and reach for the specific rhythmic pulse of the downbeat, short beat, not upbeat. Short, long, eighth note, quarter, dotted quarter note. In this case, 2/16 for the eighth note. Which in the Slavic Russian also music tradition of the 19th to 20th century, Rachmaninoff, Mussorgsky and many, is based on the downbeat starting when you do something like the opening of the third concerto by Rachmaninoff, or the second concerto. Rachmaninoff too, not on the upbeat like Beethoven does in the Pathétique, or Chopin in the Waltz, or Beethoven in the Appassionata. And most of Western European music developed, Bach included, of course, even before, but at least until the beginning of the 20th century, to be always a mostly upbeat projection of the impulse, melodically, harmonically, and of course rhythmically. So you start with an upbeat, ta-ta-ta, to arrive on a downbeat, ta-ta-ta, ta-ta, ta-ta-ta. Whenever the Slavic tradition is to start rhythmically and melodically, thematically on the beat, ta-ta, ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta. So the short, long eighth note quarter, instead of being ta-ta, with a downbeat on the long value, it's the downbeat on the short value, ta-ta, which gives a different impulse. It's something that Chopin does in the B-flat minor sonata. And in the second page, when he restates the first theme, he goes, displacing the accent on the downbeat from the upbeat. When in the opening page, it starts on the downbeat with a short right away, which is exactly what I do in when I do ta-da-da rhythms. So after variation 1, variation 2 is exploring the high register. transitional variation that brings us through chromatic drops, in this case of tritons, something more dark and more wild, less wild but still dark in the low register, chromatic descending sixths this time. In variation 3, I use a system which I adopted as a child when I composed the piece in Paris upon my first years there. I was not 10 yet. I composed this Market of the Birds, or Birds Market, and the third of the 3 movements, also in the form of variations, was the bird flies free from the cage, and I used the pedal resonance of the 2 hands repeating, well, of course, percussively, but with the pedal resonating, imaginarily transposing in sounds the idea I had then of birds' feathers flying also with the free from the cage. Kind of cymbal instrument imitation, vibrato on the piano. I use in this variation number 3. Number 3 therefore incorporates the ostinato in this toccata style, repeated fast notes with pedal, on which and around which you have the theme in canon. To variation 4, which by contrast is smoother and more singing variation, probably like a little bit of an aria in the high register. To be closer to the major mode, soothing after the second variation, and starts from the top of the keyboard and drops progressively to research and to drop to the lowest area range of the piano. Variation 5 is the first one that is no more in D minor. It's on the minor third. It's an, if not in, at least tonal centered around B minor. Its genre is canonic, and it's the slow rising after the quick dropping in variation 4 from the keyboard's range. This is a slow rising. It's flowing, it's polyphonic, it has to be voiced, if not it sounds bunched. Therefore, this theme is this time in the variation treated more like a singing flow. And variation 6 is a little bit of twin brother or sister to variation 5. So this brings us slowly to variation 7 through tremolo in the right hand and trill in the ostinato, and the theme in the baritone. Therefore, number 6 concludes itself on the dominant of F, or modally the 7th degree of D minor. So it modulates itself from the B minor of variation 5 and reaches here a very singing variation number 7 that has the arpeggios in the left hand represent the waves. Overlap above and around and under and above, of course, the theme displayed in larger values. And the triplets, sextuplets in 16th notes, very displacement, rearrangements of the decrossings in order to be not too acrobatic and to allow the melody to still be the theme heard over the fluid, flowing, watered, cascading arpeggios. And it concludes itself with a very chorale intermediary bridge. Variation 8 starts literally again with a held ostinato of D in the bass, but this time in major. And then minor. Which leads us to variation 9. You see, my idea about the variations is not to do what Rachmaninoff beautifully did with the Corelli variations on the theme of La Folia, attributed to Corelli, but it could have been many of the other Baroque musicians who all made beautiful embroiderments in music on this kind of theme. And his variations are very strictly following the theme's structure that he chose of Corelli, or at least attributed to Corelli, the pattern of this ancient tune called La Folia d'Espagna. I chose in my variations as an aim to have the variations which here are separately depicted, but to have them flowing into a continuum where they transform little by little the conception of the theme for the listener through different flowing materials. Therefore, I don't establish the start of each variation in the interpretation. I mention it here to describe each of them, but in the flow of events, it's a transformational form where the theme goes between the different parts of the texture between the hands, top, middle, or low, and in different characters, as we will see now, with variation 9 and 10. At the end of variation 8, it goes back to the center of the keyboard. Alternate driven variations with a lot of notes, like we saw earlier, or the next one, variation 10, which is a toccata with dotted rhythms in the left hand, very much percussive. Variation 11 is again contrastingly immediately after this very dramatically driven and rhythmically very edgy variation. I immediately follow it with a variation in C minor, therefore a little bit of a modulation, but very calming and soothing. Variation 12. The vindicative character of a variation like the 10th contrasts with the complaint, the lament, the different two aspects of the treatment of the same melodic pattern of the theme of which is the one I chose of my own, but highlighting it differently according to the moods, and therefore entering in variation 12, it is a dance back in D minor. Is really short and transitional, like a bridge that she, or it is, I don't know the gender of a variation in English, I think is neutral, therefore it. And reaches on variation 13 is a continuation of the sense of dance. Staccatos for the dancing part, which already was hinted in the variation 12 and here in variation 13. On top of which I quote the theme melodically, legato, spread in the high register. Superimposing it with the staccato dancing elements. So this variation 13 leads to obviously variation 14, which depicts the theme in intertwined harmonization of the melody in a high register singing wise. Of the theme, but in the middle range and more restated than developed. state it in over an octave space. Shostakovich uses this very often in his texture for piano writing, where unlike Rachmaninoff, who uses the octave very close to each other, the hands in the opening theme of the third concerto, Shostakovich often would write spread unisons over an octave, twice even gap, which gives a very nice, I find, effect of high and low register of the piano, encompassing the moods of two characters, baritone and soprano. And in this case, that's how the theme is heard. Which leads to variation 16. Literally arriving like the theme's original ending bridge to the first variation on the dominant of D. But this dominant being A major triad, in this case without the fifth, just the third, at the end of variation 16, becomes the beginning of an unexpected, I hope, tender and dolce style, the appearance of the theme again totally transformed and transfigured almost, not by the modulation only in F sharp minor, with the common tones of the dominant of D minor, but also in 6/8, 12/8, in other words, the opposite of the square 4/4, 2/4 until now, and it gives a sense of cradled flotation. Of variation 19. So not only is it in 12/8, but it also incorporates the quality pulse sibling version of the 6/8, which is the 3/4 when stretched into a hemiola. So you have the long short accompaniment, the theme in 3/4. Variation 18th in the lower register is a transitional variation. And that leads us to F sharp minor now for good for the variation 19th. In the middle register, more lower register, and more reviving its energy from this abandon. in D major and later, I restate the theme as in the opening, as if I wanted to have some kind of a, if it's not exactly the middle of the piece, but some kind of a restatement of the chorale of the opening, but this time with arpeggios in the preparation. So this restatement of the original theme in almost its original way, except the ostinato, replaced by these very powerful rising arpeggios, brings to variation 22, by total contrast, subito piano. So I like very much to explore always the extremes of the ranges in my piano writing. It's something that always brought me to do. I didn't do it as an intellectual choice or a stylistic opportunity or some kind of ideology. It was just a call, as if the edges of the keyboard, which are of course among the instruments, the widest range instruments you can find, I still don't find them enough. So in a way I explore very often the highest notes, which on most pianos don't resonate long enough because of the highest pitch, and the lowest notes are usually boomy. But I like to oppose the two, or superimpose or contrast the two, and that's how in variation 23, as a flow following the variation 22 in question, I have the theme in the middle range, in polyphony of two parts enharmonized in a single hand. Why? Because the other hand is playing parasite noises, as if to break the flow of the melody or distract from it. So it becomes a toccata style in the left hand, around the right hand, under and above, and the right hand staying stable with its two voices singing. Variation 24 is the return to the calm in the high register. So soothingly in the center of the keyboard, almost like in the womb, compared to the stretches and the screams of the variation 23, leading to variation obviously 25, which comes as a very first attempt to go a little bit faster and treat no more harmonically only the theme with its chorale, modal or tonal, but this time variation 25 starts a series of variations of canonic elements That here in variation 25 is very Bulgarian in a certain musical sense of the word, is the usage of the major second as a sort of a dissonant unison in Western European musical culture. If you do and in the modal flat 7 to the tonic 1 in the area around Sofia region of the capital of Bulgaria. The ethnic group is called Shop, or S-H-O-P, pronounced Shopite, the inhabitants, that's the nickname of them. And they usually have Shopsko Horo for the dance, or Shopski, that's the name of the dance and the singing, and sometimes they have those voices singing. They don't do the clean unison of the already Gregorian songs, the chants. Here you have. So I like to call just by myself that this is the Bulgarian unison, is the second. Variation 26 is the twin continuing this with a chromaticism middle part. Canonic idea in the right hand, while the left hand plays the dotted rhythm short long. Variation 28 has the ostinato or the dominant on A. Becomes repeated notes fast in triplets, 6 tuplets of 16th notes. Of the theme between the end of this variation and the coda. In this case, the restatement of the theme is for me a necessity because I find that the transformations of the theme are not just a playful or smart or intellectual or clever way to organize the thematic material, but it's an emotional call from lyrical or rambunctious with the toccata, or lyrical with the aria, or the canonic with the playful, or the danced with the staccato. The different type of variations that I displayed so far to describe the theme in its integrality, but sometimes its integrity changes a little bit in order to create a continuousness, which here I don't do because I stopped to describe each variation. But the point is for them to pass smoothly from one to each other, to the point to which the listener who would listen to it, I imagine, I hope, would be agreeably surprised of the transformation of the material, and not always realizing, oh, this is a new variation starting now. That was my idea, to have it hopefully successfully funnel into each other and melt into each other, transition into each other. And therefore, when at the opening I had the theme on a ostinato held tonic, here it's on a 6/4. A-D. To the coda, or you could also call it variation 30. I did both in the same, and I quoted the last time before that coda variation the theme in the major seconds, but in augmented rhythm in 8th notes instead of 16th notes. These are the Bulgarian unison, as I like to call it, as I mentioned earlier. And the final page, therefore, variation 30, the conclusion, I literally inspired myself from, and I wished to pay a certain tribute, homage to Rachmaninoff's Corelli Variations Coda. In this Slavic treatment of the theme of Corelli that he used, that is becoming here a lyrical, Slavic, nostalgic, exiled man's soul musical expression. And I myself, at my small level compared to his, I do always feel that sense of being in exile. But as he carried his Russia in himself, no matter where he was in the world, and not often in Russia, I also in a way felt that I have some Bulgarian roots that to me speak very similarly to the Slavic roots of Rachmaninoff's mood of expressive nostalgia and intense emotion. So my coda purposely mirrors, not plagiates nor quotes. It's really, I wanted to pay homage to say, this is my way of terminating, like Rachmaninoff concluded these variations in D minor with mine. Finish it deeply soft, but in the center of the keyboard after the deep basses, the screaming tops. I would say that for me the common between the coda of Rachmaninoff's and the variation 30 conclusion of mine is the usage of the spread arpeggios in the left hand in triplets. When he does, Thank you.